The first coda of The Map Is Indestructible by O.G. Rose. The first set of essays in The Map Is Indestructible have meant to highlight ways in which humans naturally map-make, though I don't mean to suggest that there are not other means, such as those described by Žižek. My hope is only to highlight a few case studies to suggest a larger point and habit, as will be the case with all sections of this book. Also, it should be noted that if we try to rebel against theory and script by not creating either, for example, then we can find ourselves existing in a world we do not understand, for we require a map to make sense of the world. It is thus not an option to be some kind of atheorist or ascripturist per se, though please note, our map will try to convince us we are indeed in a way a map to conceal itself. And yet we might be tempted to try this position by avoiding the act of putting forth a new theory or script, and instead critique the old theories and scripts as being oppressive, manipulative, inauthentic, or the like, as we will always have justified and rational reason to do, for indeed these critiques can be accurate. But this is the mistake of the rebel who is not ready to rule, who deconstructs what exists without an idea of what he or she will replace it with, which might prove like the French Revolution, leading to a reign of terror. Furthermore, if this book is correct that map-making is human nature, then to deconstruct various maps, perhaps in the name of liberation from them, will only prove to make the space for a new map, which could similarly be rebelled against on an arm. Escaping maps is not to address them, which is to say our challenge is far harder. We must play with fire. Section 1. Where information spreads easily and quickly, there will be an increase in theoretical awareness, which will easily alter how people behave and make it seem as if the theory was always right or perhaps always wrong. What good is theory, then, if the presence of theory changes how people behave? This is a measurement problem which suggests Hegel, but the point is that a scientific discovery doesn't just change how we understand the world, but it also means we become subjects who understand ourselves as knowing this theory, which might mean we are profoundly changed. Science doesn't merely generate science, but also scientists who are different kinds of subjects, for good and for bad. Ultimately, this means we're always dealing with subjectivity all the way down. There is no escape. With the problem of theoretical awareness in mind, monotheism explores how we tend to understand the world through a single theory, which, though we might never directly call a theory of everything, can practically function as such. It is remarkably difficult to avoid the temptation to filter all experience through a single theory, seeing as we require some theoretical framework to make sense of our experience. If we didn't need ideas and ultimately a theory and/or worldview, the problems explored in theoretical awareness and monotheism would not be an issue. Unfortunately, we are beings who must think to function, and the moment we think we are at great risk. Furthermore, please note that the problem usually isn't that people are monotheorists through declaration, but that those who are monotheorists tend to be practically ones, concealing the problem from themselves, which is why direct accusation rarely works. Given all the information we face today, and naturally wanting our theory to fit, we can prove vulnerable to overfitting and making the world conform to our theory more than our theory conform to the world, precisely to keep our complexity, noise, and anxiety, to keep out complexity, noise, and anxiety, a mistake which, if we make, we will likely be unable to tell we made, situated within our overfit theory. Furthermore, where there is theoretical awareness, there might be a greater push and incentive for people to engage in and identify with theory, which means the average person might be notably tempted to monotheism, to help them feel right and justified in their choice for X theory versus Y theory. A way to deal with the problem of theoretical awareness is to make our theory the theory, a framework we judge as reflecting what is the case, and so we can be as aware of our theory all we want, and it won't change what is. In this way, theoretical awareness might naturally lead into monotheism when intuitively it would seem that the spread of theories would make everyone polytheorists. Instead, the multiplication of theory makes us hungrier to escape ambiguity, and so the more we are aware of the dangers of theory, the more we can be tempted to judge our theory as something more than a theory, but an image and likeness of everything that is the case, to allude to Genesis and Wittgenstein. This forsaking of a set assessment is at least an early effort of our maps to protect themselves. If this fails, then they advance toward desire's masterpiece. To become a monotheorist is paradoxically in a way to cease being someone who even ascribes to a theory. For if my theory is the only theory, it is more like a description of isness than it is an abstract framework. Possessing isness, I then judge everything in light of that isness. It would be immoral to do anything else, and theoretical awareness becomes a problem for other people, one which actually should make them realize that they should think like me, the one who has transcended the problem of theory with isness. Now, of course, nobody thinks this way when asked directly, but practically this is how we can naturally organize and carry ourselves. We know there are theories in the world, and we know of the problems theory can cause, all of which is evidence people should think like us, beyond maps. Indeed, everyone in a map is naturally beyond maps. Please note that in this self-enclosed state, I will need ways of thinking and approaching the world that keep out critiques which might make me realize I am self-enclosed in a map. And this is where both judgment and scripts can play a role. With judgment, I can determine everyone else is wrong and thus unqualified to critique me. And with scripts, I can wrongly see everyone as inauthentic and thus also unqualified to critique me. And so I am free. Section 2. The very awareness of people about theory might change how they behave in a manner that decreases the probability a given theory is more accurate and useful than not. In this way, we might suffer the worst of all situations, a spread of theory that tempts us with monotheism, while there is also a decrease in the effectiveness of theory. This might suggest the wisdom of philosophers engaging in and focusing on skills, arts, and the like over creating theories of everything, but at the same time, theory is unavoidable. Anyway, to summarize the point, our world today might be one in which increasingly more people are aware of theory and thus intentionally seek theory to conform to social pressures or to handle the deluge of information from the internet, and yet the very spreading awareness of theory could render the theory unreliable. This could create a paradoxical and ambiguous situation that causes great confusion, and to escape this tension, people might become monotheorists, which aligns with our nature, or fall into nihilism and cynicism, not believing in any framework, despite how we ultimately require one in this state. Atomization, tribalism, totalitarianism, and the like become likely a consequence of maps and our awareness of map making. Additionally, to allude to Belonging again by O.G. Rose, where givens collapse and it is no longer given how people should thoughtlessly live their lives, and people will be desperate for direction, and in that vacuum people might turn to theory to help guide them. Perhaps the collapse of sociological givens and rise of theory correlate with this reason, but problematically theories are what people know are theories, and that can render the theories inaccurate because people change how they behave. And also the theories can feel arbitrary and manipulative, especially if something like a replication crisis occurred. As a result, the theories either prove wrong or oppressive because people confirm their actions to the theories. Once people become conscious of these influences of theory, people might rebel against theory. And yet, paradoxically, if theory is all people have left after the collapse of givens, say if we have to decide for ourselves how to understand the universe because it is no longer given that Christianity is true, then people might rebel against theory by creating another theory. And this time they might become subconscious monotheorists to assure no counter-evidence ever enters their field. The same happens with scripts. We question scripts and moral systems by leaving them and creating our own. We rebel against theory with theory. We rebel against scripts with scripts, evidence that maps are in our very nature. Not only do theories capture us and organize us without us realizing it, and we must take the risk of theorizing, but we also emergently arise in social interaction to scripts, which we might be aware of, and we must take the risk of living according to scripts. Social interactions and navigating relations is very difficult, and it's not always clear what we should do and what we shouldn't. To help us manage and handle the cognitive load, we naturally form and operate according to scripts, which in one way is a blessing, but in another way can prove oppressive and controlling. Furthermore, we can then function according to a monoscript, believing everyone should act X and or Y way. This might help the world make sense, but this will also prove violent, just like givens. As discussed in the introduction, lurking behind these three papers and the topics of theory and script, both of which we tend to reinforce with judgment and the towardness of evidence without realizing it, is the topic of ideology, as discussed masterfully and critically by Žižek, and indeed both theory and script are ideological. However, we cannot assume, as some have, that that theory resists ideology, for in fact it can be a form of it, as we also must be careful to assume that humans outside of a state or society wouldn't organically on their own form norms, givens, and or scripts to connect belonging again with this book. Though we might be tempted to think ideology, theory, and script as clearly different, the three easily empower one another, making a larger internally consistent system that is more difficult to escape. A key claim of mine is that theory, judgment, scripts, ideology, and so on are on the same gradient and are not different in kind, only degree, which is also why I try to categorize all of these under map. Touching again on belonging again, weren't there maps where there were givens? Yes, but we were not aware of these maps, nor did they have to pathologically conceal their lack of ground. Maps without givens are different in character from maps with givens. Maps today are in the business of concealing the loss of givens, but this is a pathological and impossible ideal. As a result, we end up with a radical multiplication of maps, because now maps only have to relate to themselves. As we'll explain, this is to say our age is an age of Pandora's rationality, of infinite and unleashed coherence, because rationalities are no longer bound by the virtual correspondence of givens, which, though ultimately not there, still provided a structure to contain rationality and coherence from spreading and multiplying without end. Arguably, rationality has never been in the business of correspondence, but when people believed it was relative to their givens, that belief practically bound rationality, even while rationality was still technically unbound. What people do and think is profoundly tied to their beliefs, and so givens could practically bind rationality to a virtual correspondence, even though rationality wasn't technically bound. Today, after givens, rationality is more able to be what it has always been, unbound, more like a dream, the realm of hopes and nightmares, and so rationality can dream/create all the maps it likes. All it needs is the material which the internet can easily provide, and so we are experiencing a great multiplication of maps. Givens contained the spread of internally consistent systems, but now that spread seems infinite. Where there were once sociological givens, there were also scripts which emerged relative to those givens. But once givens are gone, scripts still now form and spread, but they've lost their authority and grounding, thus making it easy for us to become cynical about them and feel that their presence is evidence of inauthenticity. This can contribute to nihilism, social withdrawal, and the like, and yet it doesn't necessarily follow that a script verifies inauthenticity. At most, we can say they create inauthenticity, a situation which brings Baudrillard and Schrödinger to mind. But faced with that very ambiguity, the temptation for what Lacan calls a big other and new, more powerful maps, which can help us escape that ambiguity, grows. We cannot rely on givens anymore to provide us thoughtless direction, and so we turn to maps to hide the gap. That all said, we cannot assume those who follow scripts are inauthentic, though an age of cynicism which honors cynics will incentivize cynics to appear and claim such, which will be easy to do, seeing as scripts are everywhere thanks to the internet, and because it seems true that following the script is a sign of inauthenticity, which will contribute to people either locking themselves inside their maps to avoid the cynicism, being existentially overwhelmed by the cynicism, which makes them vulnerable to totalitarianism, and or isolating themselves and giving up on wider community, because what's the point? In a world of scripts, it becomes exhausting to wonder all the time who's authentic and who's not. In a way, we can avoid that tension simply by staying within our script and our map, which we know is authentic. If we're a Christian, for example, we may just stay around other Christians scripts of Christianity involve salvation, John 3:16, church, and the like. These are at least familiar scripts that we know we believe in, and so it's easy to feel like these all are authentic scripts and are true scripts. All the others are not so clear and exhausting, and it's easier not to think about them by sticking to the scripts we trust and know. And so in this way, scripts contribute to ideology in keeping us on our map, both in that everything outside our map feels inauthentic, and we don't want to have to think about if we really is or isn't, while the scripts inside our map feel like ones we can trust. The same holds regarding theoretical awareness and monotheism. The theory which works for us is the theory we know might be wrong, but that which is easiest to keep believing, while everything outside our map is that which we'd have to investigate, reconsider, and work through. All in this world when everyone constantly feels exhausted, and in which our awareness of theory might decrease the probability that the theory we hold to proves useful, which is to say the main role of theory is to feel oriented. To help us feel oriented. Section 3. A world of scripts is a world of inauthentic bothness. Like Schrödinger's cat, And if scripts perhaps try to replace sociological givens, the thoughtless ways we organize society before the death of God, then this ambiguity works against their success. Now that these scripts aren't undergirded by and reflective of givens, we might try to fix the problem by creating greater and more complex metascripts that transcend immediacy and are harder to identify as scripts. Say notions of personality, community, and identity based on advanced theories of physics which require understanding complexity theory and Hegel. But this might only work for a minority of people, if at all. We are right to be wary of scripts, please note, for corporations, governments, and so on use scripts to control and capture us, but so does our neighbor who doesn't want to feel alone in her Christian worldview. It is hard not to be desperate for a feeling of shared intelligibility, and I can use scripts to try to pull people into helping provide me with that shared intelligibility in them coming to share my map. And so map colonialization through democracy on the internet grows and spreads, which isn't inherently bad. It seems unavoidable and possibly generative, but it does suggest a tension which could prove destructive, unless, that is, we develop the personalities and skills to handle that tension and not fall instead into self-effacing conflicts or masterpieces of desire. But more on that later. Following a script or engaging in monotheorizing, we are notably susceptible to self-delusion and to be self-manipulated by evidence we make toward us, as we must do to some phenomenon in having some worldview. This problem can be mitigated if we learn to assess versus judge, to make linguistic distinctions I hold to in this paper at least. But that would require us to resist the temptation to use judgment to protect us from ambiguity caused by scripts and different maps. Tempted to treat our theories and scripts as authoritative, or tempted to cynically treat them as irrelevant, both of these are problematic responses. We can then judge versus assess the world is what corresponds to our maps, and so we will make all phenomena toward us as evidence confirming this map, which will then make us susceptible to the problem of self-delusion, which is to say, if we are wrong, we cannot know we are wrong. To judge versus assess greatly increases the probability that we are captured by a map which we will then fail to be productively critical of. And once we make this mistake, we will struggle to locate a standard by which we can tell if we are self-deceived or usefully making phenomenon toward us as evidence. But for all our performative talk against ideology, who doesn't want to make this mistake if avoiding it means we face the anxiety of a lifetime? A child who creates from tension? Perhaps. Scripts are hard to critique if we actually try versus keep a cynical distance, precisely because they might be authentic. But with judgment, we can slice through the difficulty and just say yay or nay, which is to say we are likely to approve our map as good and other maps as bad, something that almost necessarily follows. Alluding to belong again, we can use judgment as a fake and problematic way to return to givens. For if I say X or Y is versus hold a more tentative assessment, then I am suggesting that X or Y is like a given, even if it is not. Scripts and theories also try to fill the void left by givens, but in us recognizing them, they come to create feelings of arbitrariness and inauthenticity, which works against their capacity to ground us like givens. Unless, that is, we can harshly judge our scripts and our theory as what is the case, meaning we cut ourselves off from assessment and taking other maps with the same seriousness. In this way, we can use judgment to avoid the problem of internally consistent systems and enclose ourselves within our map, which is to say that the first step to fighting ideology and capture could be the step from judgment to assessment. Once we stop judging things as what is and instead assess them as possibly the case, we are now open to experience the world in a new way. Not that we won't at first regret this openness, given all the anxiety we might face. Section 4. To review, theoretical awareness makes us aware that we are in theories, which risks reducing the effectiveness of those theories, and then to perhaps feel like we are practically beyond theory in this risk, we tend to engage in monotheism, which makes us stuck in a single theory of everything that is likely in its exclusivity to be overfit and wrongly employed. This logic applies to all maps, and these maps will generate scripts which organize our activity and thinking organically, transforming us into actors without us realizing it, all while we realize it is happening to others, who we can thus discount with their maps, protecting our own as something special. So organized, we are then at risk of engaging in self-delusion, which further traps us in our map and corresponding script, which will make phenomenon toward us as evidence, which primes us to engage in judgment, which gradually transforms our map into practically the territory. even though we'd know better when asked directly. The break between the practical and the technical might uniquely serve ideology. With every judgment that indirectly suggests our map is right versus tentatively or conditionally right, ergo assessment, for if we say you are a liar, we also require our hermeneutical model to be right through which we make this judgment. We become more invested in it, which means we will become more invested in our script and in engaging in means to defend it, like monotheism. All ironically, while the likelihood of our map working might decrease due to theoretical awareness, and or while we use theoretical awareness as a concept to label what other people are doing as ideological, precisely to avoid facing our own ideology. There is no limit to what we will do or come up with to defend our map, suggesting a hurdle we must overcome to become better decision makers, as we'll later discuss. As described in The Conflict of Mind, we learn from David Hume that good philosophy is a form of self-defense against manipulation, power, ideology, and the like. And the first 4 papers of The Map Is Indestructible suggest that we must defend ourselves from ourselves. Our own minds are prone to naturally structure the world toward us in a manner that makes us vulnerable to manipulation, self-deception, and a self-enclosed structure that we will not easily escape. And once we begin navigating ourselves into a system rationally, whether it be an ideology, a conspiracy, a form of religious fanaticism, or the like, we will not easily escape. A single step through the entrance can be the last step in a lifelong commitment, rationally, which we might only realize after we take the step and sign the contract, per se. The stakes are high, and the only mistakes might be large. We are already primed by our brains to slip into self-enclosure and self-deception, let alone if we find ourselves in groups, associations, or the like, which encourage us to self-enclose and or self-deceive ourselves into something internally consistent. Soul suppressors are remarkably powerful, and we are already primed just by being ourselves to fall into ideological deception and manipulation. Considering this, the likelihood we avoid such a fate without training is remarkably low, and yet in my view, education is mostly in the business of teaching us to think of thinking, not as a tool of self-defense, but as a tool for research and gaining a true picture of the world, which, though not entirely false, leaves us woefully unprepared to deal with manipulation in our own frenemy brains. Thinking is a matter of self-defense, while hopes for correspondence in a manner that make possible certainty are a fantasy that only leave us unprepared for what's coming, and especially given AI, something is indeed coming. What we see today are people who don't want oppressive maps but cannot help but form them. We are cynical of scripts and yet also don't trust where scripts are lacking. We know it is bad to be judgmental but cannot help but do something like judge to make choices. We know the world is too complex for a single theory but make that point part of our theory of everything, and so on. We are a mixed paradox in which our social situation is in conflict with our map-making nature, and in this paradox arises an ambiguity which creates an anxiety we are desperate to escape. To accomplish this, we are naturally vulnerable to seal ourselves in a single map we never question, which seemingly makes maps disappear as does water for a fish, for that helps us forget about, like thoughtlessness, all of these ambiguous tensions. And so we search for the method of map sealing and moralities, which make staying in our map as isness the right thing to do. If map-making is human nature, then we are subjects all the way down, and that means we cannot escape the subjectivity which proves the source and creation of maps. What does this mean? Ultimately, it means we might have to be more Hegelian than we want to be, but for now we will say that it means we must be at risk. And to avoid realizing that risk and facing it, we might turn to methods to keep us from ever venturing beyond our internally consistent systems, not that we would ever find reason to leave if we tried. The levels of insulation are thick, which is to say we engage in methods of map sealing. What do I mean by this? I mean we employ the apocalypse in blood to the benefit of our maps. For more by O.G. Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, Instagram, Amazon, and so on. And thank you so much for your time.